Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decoding TV, a podcast covering the latest and greatest in television. I am David Chen.
And I'm Don Marshall.
On this episode of Decoding TV, we're going to be covering The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, episodes 1 and 2, which just premiered on Prime Video. Episode 1, entitled Shadow of the Past, episode 2, entitled Adrift. And I'm really excited to dive into the show with Don Marshall, who is one of the internet's best experts about Middle-earth and everything Lord of the Rings.
I'm blushing, David, but thank you.
Before we get into our conversation about these episodes, though, I do want to just outline what our approach is going to be. We are going to assume that you have seen or at least have familiarity with many of the major plot points from Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring trilogy, as well as the Hobbit trilogy. But we will not assume you have any other knowledge of the show other than what you have been watching in the episode. So we won't assume you've read the appendices of a Silmarillion. We won't assume that you know what happens to these characters. We're going to be very much approaching The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power from a show watcher's perspective. So if you're just watching this from the perspective of someone who maybe watched the Peter Jackson movies a long time ago and wants to enjoy this show fresh, that is the approach we're going to take. We're not going to spoil anything that happens to any of these characters in The Rings of Power. At times, Don Marshall may speculate or theorize on what some of the things happening in the show are. If he does that, we will give you a little warning in advance if you don't want to kind of potentially be spoiled by Don's speculation. But even Don doesn't know things. He has a lot of information that he's drawing from that you don't have, and he's making educated guesses. But that is going to be our approach with spoilers for this podcast. So just want people to know before we get into it. All right. Let's dive into The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, episodes 1 and 2, which just premiered on Prime Video. And let's talk about overall thoughts on the episode.
I really loved the first two episodes. I think they did a great job. For me, as a Tolkien sort of lover, I understand that it's an adaptation, so I'm very curious to see different people's takes on Tolkien. And whenever I approach an adaptation of anything, really, but especially Tolkien, I always want to make sure that they capture the spirit. Do I feel like I have been transported back to Middle-earth? And I really think they captured that in a very profound way for me.
I also really enjoyed these two episodes. I'll say a couple quick things about them. First of all the money's there on screen. I host a podcast called The Filmcast, and my co-host was remarking, this is what you can get when your above the line talent is not like A-list talent that you need to pay $20-30 million to, right? Like a lot of these people are relative unknowns. And I actually think not only does that result in more money being put to what you see on screen, but it's actually better for the story as well. Like you can really imagine these characters, as opposed to if like Leonardo DiCaprio was like a Harfoot, you'd be like, that's Leonardo DiCaprio as a Harfoot.
It's like when Matt Damon shows up in Interstellar, it's like, oh, that's Matt Damon. That's not a spaceman. No.
Exactly right. That's the Martian guy. Anyway, so I actually think it works to their benefit that you're like really imagining these characters in these roles, and like they kind of embody the characters for all intents and purposes. It's very much taking a Game of Thrones-esque approach to the story, which is to say we start by like jumping around all over the place, right? And that is not necessarily the story they had to tell, right? Like they could have just told it from Galadriel's perspective. They could have told it from just Elrond's perspective. Like they could have done a number of things, but they decided to take this kind of approach where we're meeting and getting invested in all these different characters from around the Middle-earth universe. And I think that is worth noting as kind of, I guess, a template with which we visit modern fantasy worlds these days. Is kind of we're getting a whole 360 picture of everything that's going on.
Mm-hmm. And I think they did a really great job just sort of creating a feeling of like, obviously we start with Galadriel. I won't get into episode specifics too much, but it definitely feels like a Game of Thrones vibe where we're bouncing all around these various kingdoms that are in and around Middle-earth.
Yeah. I think that I am interested in some of the storytelling decisions they made. And I will say I was confused at a couple of them, and we're going to talk about that. And you're going to help clear things up for me and the audience. But the biggest challenge I think they've set out for themselves is that this is basically a prequel, and it does have some prequel vibes because many of the major characters are characters that we knew in the Lord of the Rings movies, right?
Right.
And also we know what happens to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, can you create enough dramatic tension to still make those stories interesting? Like we already kind of know what happens with the Rings of Power, right? Like we kind of know that eventually what happens at the end. We kind of know what happens with Sauron at the end, right? We know that Galadriel survives to the Fellowship of the Ring. So it's like there's all these questions that have already been answered.
Mm-hmm.
And the success of a show like this is going to depend on how well can it introduce new questions that are interesting to the audience,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how well can it come up with something of its own to say about society and the world at large? So far, we don't really have a clear sense of how that's all going to end up. Obviously, we're just 2 episodes into one season of what may be multiple seasons, but I'm intrigued and I am dazzled by how good the show looks. There are so many moments that are visually arresting, and I had a great time watching the first 2 episodes. So let's dive into it, Don. Now,
let's do it.
I do want to also call out, right, before we even get to the plot, this show does something that House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones show, did this season, which is you have a first episode with no title sequence, and then a second episode with the title sequence.
Yes, I noticed that too.
Interesting approach. And I think the idea is when you're watching the first episode, you're kind of in this world. They don't want to pull you out of the world and remind you that you're watching a television show.
Right.
And so you're just right into the world. And then it's only when you come back for the second episode that they're like, okay, you at this point, you know you're watching a TV show. Here's the title sequence. This might be one of the most beautiful title sequences of all time, I think.
Really? You think so?
I loved it because what you're seeing is like this sand kind of vibrate and then form different shapes and formations. And you kind of feel like the sand is trying to communicate the vast expanse of time through like what it's doing. And then also like the presence of evil through like different colors.
There's that little darker shade of sand that snakes through.
And it's like, it looks photorealistic. Like it looks like they could have actually figured out a way to do it in real life, although it might have been CG. But I thought it
turns
incredible.
out it's just practical, like kinetic sand that they're
with like magnets or whatever. It would be amazing. Yeah. But what did you think of the opening title sequence?
I'll be perfectly honest. I think, and we're starting off great because I disagree with you on one of the very first things we talk about. I was slightly unimpressed by the title sequence, but I feel like I need to go back and maybe watch it again to kind of appreciate it, because when I first saw it, I went, okay, I'm trying to figure out what they're trying to say, and maybe I was reaching a little too far, or just it didn't click in my brain because it was very late. But it maybe I'm just showing my bias here, but I very much wanted there to be a Game of Thrones-esque epicness in scale. And I don't want them to steal like the zooming over the map and building up these, paper towers and things. But Middle Earth is known by the map so well, arguably more than George R.R. Martin or really any other fantasy series. Based on the landscape, right? The Misty Mountains right down the center, the Shire in the midst, that sort of perpendicular mountain range where Mordor is down in the bottom right. Like, I kind of wanted a little bit more out of it, but I will withhold judgment until I can sort of go back and watch it again and maybe try and pick out the deeper meanings.
That's interesting. I think that in terms of deeper meanings, I feel like it's just trying to be vibes, man. Like that was kind of my thought. The Game of Thrones opening credit sequences, both for Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, were trying to inform you about the world, right? They're trying to be like, this is what the universe is. That's not what this title sequence is trying to do. I think it's just trying to like give you a feeling of what this world is like and what the universe they're trying to create is. So it's just vibes.
Okay.
It's just vibes. It's a very different approach.
I'll think about it less then. Maybe I'll just, no thoughts, just vibes.
I think that's kind of what I'm suggesting. That's kind of what I'm suggesting.
Ready for it.
Okay. So let's talk about. Well, I am curious. Like, are you a fan of the approach of not having opening credits until the second episode?
100%. I love that they just threw us into the deep end with it. Yeah.
There is a prologue in the first episode of The Rings of Power, and it's kind of similar in tone to the prologue of Lord of the Rings: Fellowship of the Ring, with Cate Blanchett playing Galadriel there. And in this show, it's Morfydd Clark, I believe, right?
Yes, Morfydd Clark. There is also a younger Galadriel who is played by oh goodness, I'm going to forget her name, and this is terrible because her father and I have spoken a few times. But yes, this young Galadriel kind of approaches, and you are in Valinor. You are in sort of the Undying Lands, and we kind of get to see this little perfect piece of. It's not elf heaven because it's a physical place, but like this is their paradise, basically.
Yeah. So this opening scene is with is in Valinor, basically.
It is, yes, it is in Valinor, and again,
the place with the big sun that we see later in the episode, right?
Kind of, yes. And it's funny you mentioned the sun specifically because I have notes about this. So here's a fun, obscure Lord of the Rings fact, right? Back in the first age of Middle Earth, and even before then, and you see this in the scene as the elf walking up the hill. You see this city, and then you see two brightly colored trees in the distance. The trees are called Lorelin and Telperion, and they existed before the sun and moon existed. The god in Tolkien's universe didn't create the sun and moon until a little bit later, when, as we see a few moments later in the prologue, the trees are destroyed by Sauron's master Morgoth.
So in the opening sequence, there's child Galadriel. She's hanging out with her brother. She's trying to make a ship go down a stream, and it's a metaphor for her spirit wanting to be free and rebel against, what society has in store for her. And it's a lovely interaction. Like, Bear McCreary did the score for this show, and I think it's quite evocative of Howard Shore's music for the Peter Jackson trilogy, while still being its own thing, while still having its own themes and being its own way. But there are moments where it does like evoke and remind me a lot of Howard Shore's score, and this opening sequence is one of them. But they have a lovely little interaction, and he kind of lays out one of the themes of this episode and possibly the show about fixing your eyes on the right thing and focusing on the right thing, and understanding what dynamics are at play, so you don't get pulled under, like a ship. And then we get the full backstory for everything that happens during the First Age, right? And this is an older Galadriel that is describing what's going on. And I have to say, Don, I found this to be a little bit puzzling, this whole sequence. Like you talked about the trees, and that was helpful what you just said, but I was a little bit confused. Like, what does the tree represent? Who is Morgoth? Is Morgoth is basically Sauron's old boss, right?
Yeah. So without going so deep into Tolkien's Legendarium, this episode becomes 4 hours. There is a god in Tolkien's universe. He made some ethereal children of his thought called the Ainur, and they all have magical powers and created the physical world. One of those Ainur rebelled against Dad and said, I'm moving out. I hate you so much, and basically ruined everything for everyone. And that is Morgoth.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach to introduce us to a villain that we don't see really and don't know that much about, and by the way, here's a villain that you knew from before. Like,
yeah.
It's I'm like, not sure. I love it from a storytelling perspective, because it's like, if you're gonna make Morgoth be the big bad, like, make Morgoth be the big bad, and like that's the thing we're fighting against. Because we don't know what, like, as an audience who saw Lord of the Rings, we don't know what happened to Morgoth necessarily, right? We do know what happens to Sauron at the end of Lord of the Rings. So. Didn't love it, but anyway, are there any other things from this prologue you want to highlight? And by the way, I do want to mention that the child Galadriel was Amélie Child Villiers.
Thank you.
Amélie Child Villiers is the actress who plays her. Anyway,
appreciate it.
Anything else you want to mention about this prologue, Don Marshall?
From a visual standpoint, I thought it was stunning. I thought we saw when Galadriel's brother Finrod is walking up the hill, we see cresting over the city. That's a nice. The prologue very much felt like visual eye candy to those of us that have read the Silmarillion, just that explains everything that happens in the First Age. So I know that is the city of Tirion upon Tuna, not Tyrion like Game of Thrones, and not tuna. There's an accent over the U. Like there's all these like little Easter egg bits that, were very much nods to Silmarillion readers. But yeah, I found the prologue needing a little bit more explanation, just to kind of hook people into the story, because it does play, the events of the First Age do play an important role in the Second Age to kind of provide context to where's everybody at? Why is Galadriel the way she is? Visually, though, loved the eagles and the fell beasts fighting in midair. Well, I think one of the eagles was on fire and crashed into the ground when we see in that battle scene.
I mean, for decades, Don Marshall, people have asked the question, why didn't those hobbits just take an eagle to drop that ring off at Mount Doom? The answer is because they would have been freaking lit on fire, as we find out in the first episode of Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. Right?
Oh, I wrote 97 pages of fan fiction for nothing.
And they just showed it in 10 frames of the show.
They did. Well, actually, David, I don't even know if you know this. I got that question so much that I literally just started writing for hours, because in my mind, the eagle would get tempted by the ring and overthrow Sauron and rule Middle-earth as their bird overlord. And everyone's like, wow, that sounds fun. I wonder what that world would look like.
No, it's because the actual reason, Don Marshall, is because eagles have the tendency to occasionally ignite in flames.
I cannot thank whoever made that decision to show the eagle on fire. Cannot thank them enough for making my job for the rest of my life so much easier.
But the things we do glean from the prologue are Morgoth and Sauron. They killed a lot of elves, basically, right? You see this shot of Galadriel standing with like a helmet or whatever, and it's like, wow, tons and like a really impressive mountain of helmets they built, by the way. That's just like, wow, a lot of elves are dead. On the one hand, it's a little bit maddeningly vague, I have to say, what happens. On the other hand, no more vague than I would say what happened in the prologue for Fellowship of the Ring. We forged all these rings, one ring to rule them all. I guess that's how that works. And kind of similar vibe here, where it's like, well, okay, yeah, Morgoth killed a bunch of elves, and now Galadriel's really pissed. I mean, throughout the course of the episode...
That's it.
Throughout the course of the episode, she kind of describes how pissed. She's like, look, if you had to name every single one of these elves, it would be like longer than your lifetime. Now, I think she's probably exaggerating for effect.
I don't know about that. We'll come back to that when we get to that scene.
The scale must be like millions of elves, right? It must be like millions of elves have been killed. So, so yeah, it's a little bit vague, but we get the kind of main effect.
Yeah, you get the idea.
We get the idea. What we are going to do now on this podcast is we are going to cover each of the characters' storylines one by one, rather than like jump scene by scene. So we're going to cover everything that happens to Galadriel, everything that happens with Elrond, and so on. And it will span the first 2 episodes. So we're going to assume you've seen the first 2 episodes of the show. So we start with Galadriel at Forodwaith, the northernmost waste. And this goes to the statement I made earlier, or I might not have made it earlier, but I thought it earlier, which is that every 30 seconds when you're watching this show, you're seeing something incredible. You're seeing like, oh my God, like, I didn't even know that was possible. And that's what's great about Middle Earth is it's very beautiful, but it's like, it's kind of like Earth, but just a little bit weird and different. Like there's just these little differences that are like, that's not something that would occur on Earth necessarily. And so she's at this huge mountain that has like a massive waterfall that's just like, whoa, this is incredible what I'm looking at. And then of course you never see it again, which is
Yeah.
another thing that happens in the show is like
Yeah.
you're watching something, it's like, oh my gosh, that looks like it cost $1 million, and then we're not going to look at that again.
It's gone. It's gone forever.
Forget it. It's wipe it from your mind. We're never seeing it again.
Meanwhile, here's Peter Jackson, who's filming Viggo Mortensen, Orlando Bloom, and John Rhys Davies just running in a helicopter for like 3 hours. And there's a very long sequence in the Two Towers where I'm like, all right, they're running. Oh, it's another shot of them running. Oh, okay, it's a close-up, still running. A fifth shot, a 10th okay, Peter, calm down.
It's like Peter spent a lot of money on the helicopter that day, and he's going to get the most use of it. This is like the opposite of that, which is like, they're using the shot once, and it's like, we're never using it again. So it's like, okay, all right, whatever. You guys know best. But Galadriel and her team of elf commandos, Don's words, not mine.
That's what they are, right? Right. If you're on a team with Galadriel and you're... am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yeah, I think it's
fine. If you're a badass elf and you're traveling with Galadriel with like swords and armor, you're a commando, right?
Yes.
You're special ops.
They travel north of the Misty Mountains to try and find Sauron and stumble upon an abandoned fortress in the north of Middle-earth. So they go into this fortress, scary stuff happens. They find an orc, as far as I can tell, right? Or no, not an orc, like a ice troll creature,
yeah, well,
right?
they do find an orc, but the dark magic that, according to Galadriel in the episode, the dark magic that Sauron used, like melded his body into the wall.
Yes,
turned him to stone. It was very cool visually. Again, one of those things we never see again.
No.
Someone
spent 30 hours making that thing. You see it for like 10 seconds and then you never see it. But it's very much like it's giving Han Solo frozen in carbonite vibes.
Yes,
basically.
Yes, yeah. Same vibe.
Yeah.
So then they find this mark of Sauron on the ground, and it's like, oh my, there's evil here, and Sauron was here, and we need to keep moving. And then there's this a kind of interesting conversation, which is kind of where I thought, ooh, the dialogue in this show is quite good, because I think they got the elves right when they're sort of doing that like high and lofty kind of speech.
Also, Sauron, by the way, I think the original Jigsaw killer. I'm just gonna put that out there. He leaves a little mark on, he's basically Sauron's like one of the most prolific serial killers of all time. Is I think what the show is trying to say. He likes to kill people, leave a little mark on them.
There was a
little artist. You can imagine. Yeah, go ahead.
There's a mark on Galadriel's brother that we see in the prologue that is the same mark that appears on that stone slab Galadriel finds,
and multiple other locations throughout the episode. But you can tell like Sauron is one of those serial killers that's really into arts and crafts. Like when he's if you were to see Sauron's basement, he'd have like yarn all over the walls and like newspaper clippings and collaging and stuff like that. That's kind of how I imagine him. Anyway. So they fight an ice troll. Pretty cool. Like she jumps up on the sword and cuts this ice troll in multiple ways. Badass sequence.
I'm team sword jump. I really like that sequence. In the same way that as a 12-year-old, I loved Legolas sliding down the staircase on the back of a shield and taking out an Oilifant. 12-year-old me thought that was so cool. And then I see this, I'm like, yeah, all right.
If you liked Legolas sliding down the stairs on a shield, you're gonna love Galadriel jumping on a sword and killing the ice troll. So
yeah.
But the other elves are so shaken by this encounter, they're like, "We're not doing this anymore." And I thought it was a cool like gesture. I didn't know if this was in the books or anything, Don, where they like lay down their swords as a thing of like, you're on your own, right?
As far as I'm aware, that's not something that Tolkien mentions specifically, but just in terms of holding a sword to show that you are done fighting, throwing down a sword, laying it on the ground is usually a sign of surrender or mutiny or pacifism. So I really liked that moment. I thought that was very, very well done.
Now, at that point, we kind of cut away and go to another scene. But my interpretation of that was, I guess Galadriel's just going off on her own and doing her own thing. But nope, I think she decided I can't do this on my own, and so she decided to go home. Right?
She did.
Yeah. So she goes home.
So she gets to we because we jump around, we see her again in one of Elrond's scenes, and Elrond is basically just this wonderful, amazing guy who is at this point sort of a politician in his life, and there's this sort of like understanding that Elrond and Galadriel are friends, because we again see Galadriel when Elrond approaches her, and they do this little like face touch thing. They speak Elvish. One of my friends translated everything that they say. It's wonderful. And they have a conversation about traveling to the Undying Lands. And Elrond, who has never been to the Undying Lands, he was born in Middle Earth, is like, is it wonderful? Is it beautiful? I have heard things about this. And Galadriel, is basically sort of recounting what she felt in the prologue in a little bit more profound way. We get some really cool dialogue there as well.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the whole Elrond Galadriel interactions before we go back to Galadriel on her own in a ship again. We are in Lindon for these scenes with Elrond, which is the elven capital of the Second Age. Gil-galad is the elven king at this time.
It might also be Gil-galad, depending on who you ask. It's a whole thing. Tolkien pronunciations are a wild community.
I will say watching this was very confusing because it's like they're in Middle Earth. Like in the prologue, there's this massive deal made out of the fact that the elves traveled from their land to Middle Earth.
Yes.
But now we're still in Middle Earth, and we are now told this is the elven capital. So was the elven capital always in Middle Earth, or did they establish it during the Second Age in Middle Earth? Like
it was established in the Second Age. There were, back in the First Age, there were, oh God, off the top of my head, at least 3 or 4 different like realms, not necessarily kingdoms. You know, there's a giant forest called Doriath, and there's a couple of others with an elf named Círdan over on the west hand side of Middle Earth, and there are a couple of others, but Lindon, for all intents and purposes, in watching the show, is sort of like the bastion of elven culture and peacefulness, because a lot of the places that were in the First Age, because of that war that we saw in the prologue, are no longer there. So Lindon has kind of remained firm.
And they are theoretically going to transcend and go back to Valinor, right? Which is elf heaven, basically, right?
Right. So at this point in the story, it's not necessarily elf heaven because they're not dead. They are still very much alive.
Right.
They're still on the same, the physical world.
It's like heaven on earth,
Pretty much,
Ooh,
yeah.
Valinor is a place on earth, basically, right? Or in
Yes.
Middle Earth. It's actually not in Middle Earth, if I recall correctly, right?
It's its own continent, just very, very, very far west of Middle Earth. Yes,
but I guess the idea is it's like the elven equivalent of paradise, or and it certainly represents the idea of heaven metaphorically, right?
Oh, 100%, 100%.
Okay. But Valinor was that place in the prologue with the dying tree and everything. Is that right? Or like
that is correct. Yeah.
So that was also confusing. Is that like we saw this place like kind of get wrecked right, in the opening scene, and then the next time it's referred to, it's like, oh, that place is awesome now, and it's like, okay, that's weird. It's just a weird storytelling thing that they didn't like show it, or like.
I can maybe provide a little bit of context.
Yeah, sure.
So there is Valinor, also called the Undying Lands, which is where that first scene in the prologue happens with Galadriel, and we see the trees, and we see everything get dark. And then there's an elf named Feyenoor, who in the First Age, we'll get to Feyenoor in a minute when we get to Elrond stuff, because there's a brief mention of him, and I very much like that. Yeah. Feyenoor makes these beautiful jewels called the Silmarils. Morgoth kills the trees, steals the Silmarils, and runs away from Valinor. He is no longer in the Undying Lands. He's like, I'm not safe here. I'm out. Goes to Middle Earth, pieces out, just starts ruling over there, finds his own kingdom. The elves follow him. A lot of the elves follow him to Middle Earth, and that is the war that we see.
Yeah. But I would say, that helps a little bit, but from a show perspective, it's just a little bit unclear.
Yeah, which is why I was kind of like a little iffy on the prologue. I was like, you could have done
a little bit more there. Like we're willing to go pretty far with you, show. Just take us the rest of the way. So, a question for you, Don Marshall, about the portrayal of elves in this show. I was watching the first couple episodes with a friend of mine. and she was quite distraught at the depiction of elves because she thinks elves are supposed to be like fairly unemotional, like Vulcans in Star Trek and such.
Mm.
And Galadriel is not that at all. She kind of very much is a human, right? Very human, relatable emotions. I guess I'm curious if you had an opinion on the depiction of elves in The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power.
Yeah, so I actually like the way they're portraying the elves. They did sort of lean towards a little bit more of a human style, at least in terms of emotions and a little bit in the dialogue. But I don't think that's a bad thing. Elves, at least in Tolkien's grand mythos, are very calm, very serene, but there are a few, Galadriel being one of them, as we see in Fellowship of the Ring, the elf Feyenoor that I just mentioned. There are a couple of others in other First Age stories that are prone to lash out, right? As soon as that temper bubbles up to the top and spills over, all of a sudden they're making terrible decisions and they are filled with this wrath and they just go start either wrecking shop or hurting the people around them.
So they are not incapable of emotion or anything like that, right?
No, they can 100% show emotion, and often when they do, terrible things happen.
Right. And we saw Cate Blanchett's character get really angry during, The Lord of the Rings as well. So, or Fellowship of the Ring, I should say.
Yeah, it's the temptation.
So Gil-galad tells Galadriel and the rest of her elf commandos she's going home to Valinor. Galadriel doesn't like this, and there's a lot of tension around this because Galadriel wants to go out and track down Sauron, right? But they're like, you're going home to Valinor. You're going to go sing the peaceful elf songs for the rest of the time. And Elrond and Galadriel kind of talk a little bit about their past, and there's this kind of scene where it's Gil-galad that's basically saying like, hey, thanks to everyone for all of your hard work. You're getting the company waffle party this year, or whatever it is, right? And
is that a Severance reference?
Yes, it is.
Oh, I'm only on episode 4. No spoilers,
okay,
please.
All right.
Hang on, waffle parties.
Don't Google that. So,
okay.
Anyway, there's this moment where kind of Galadriel needs to bow her head to like acknowledge that she's accepted her fate, and it's very difficult for her, but she does it. And that's kind of what goes on before Galadriel gets on the boat, right? So any thoughts on this scene, any details on this sequence, Don, that you want to mention?
Yeah, the whole Galadriel in Lindon interaction was really interesting. I really liked the dynamic she had with Gil-galad, because there is very much that tension there, because the elves are very, they're very proud. They're very sure of themselves. And, a confident king like Gil-galad is going to try and be, that statesman that can assure everybody. And then here is this little, thorn in his side in Galadriel. And someone said to me that it felt like it was out of character. Why would Gil-galad send some of his best fighters home if he knows that the evil still lurks, or even if he thinks the evil still lurks? In my mind, he's smart enough to know that, like, I can lose 7 or 8 warriors if it means I can get rid of her. And I want to get rid of her. So I thought that was really, that was a kind of like a statesman sort of way to handle it.
Interesting. Well, and then later he does explain that sometimes something that's trying to blow out the fire can fan the flames, right? Like,
yes,
sometimes the cure can be worse than the disease. Right? Sometimes, like, trying to get rid of something, in doing so, you may end up making the thing worse.
Right.
That's his philosophy. Is like, if we just don't do anything about Sauron, it's all going to be fine.
And
right?
It's what they did. You know what? That is so quintessentially Elven, because it's what they did during the First Age in their battle against Morgoth, Sauron's master. They're like, all right, cool. We know Morgoth is here, but we're going to establish these kingdoms. We're going to fight every once in a while, but, like, let's just leave him do his thing. It couldn't possibly get any worse.
There may or may not be politicians in our world, Don, that are like, hey, if we just don't look at the COVID numbers, maybe it's not that bad,
Yeah.
Certainly no one has ever suggested such a thing.
Oh, no.
In our world. Anyway.
Ridiculous.
And that's basically, I think, Galadriel. We should also mention Galadriel and Elrond had that interaction in kind of that forest with the wooden statues. Where they kind of Yeah, go ahead.
So that is what I assume to be a kind of memorial, because we do see one that very much looks like her brother. We actually see there's two really cool ones that I love. One of the statues has a dog standing in front of the elf, and I think that is a nod to a talking dog that existed in the First Age named Huan. Huan went on this quest with this elfin human named Baron and Luthien, who are ancestors both of Aragorn and Arwen, thousands and thousands of years down the line. But seeing a dog standing in front of an elf, that was a nice little Easter egg for someone like me.
Yeah. And just the wooden statues look like they were actually carved out of wood. Like maybe they were CG, gorgeous. But they looked amazing. I was like, this is, again, we're probably never going to visit this set again, and it's like, okay, someone spent 100 hours making that wooden carving or those wooden carvings, and it looks amazing. But they kind of have a confrontation about like, hey, do you want, like, how many more people need to die, Galadriel, for you to feel like your quixotic quest has been fulfilled?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Because I think it was something that Elrond said that like the evil is gone from this land, and Galadriel responds, then why is it not gone from in here, and points to herself, because she still sort of feels that evil, and Elrond being both the friend and kind of the politician, which David, I don't know if you noticed this, Elrond is writing Gil-galad's speech when we first see him, and he's
mouthing it.
He's mouthing the words as he's putting the crown on Galadriel's head, and I just went, yeah, no, that fits perfectly. But we'll get more into that.
I love a good speech mouthing scene. I'm not even joking. I love it. I love it when that happens in a movie or a TV show. So
yeah.
But anyway, they have differing approaches on like what they think that Galadriel should do. Elrond's like, hey, you got to let go of this thing. It's only when you let go that you can heal. And Galadriel's like, no, I got to go out there and face this thing.
Yeah.
And so Galadriel is heading back on the ship to Valinor. I mean, we all know. Here's the thing, Don. We all know she's not going to go to Valinor. Okay, like
yeah, we've seen the trailers. We know what's happening.
If you've seen the trailer or literally any promotional imagery for the show, you know that she's not going to go to Valinor. I will say that the scenes of the boat heading to Valinor are so beautiful. Like the little birds flying overhead. It's just like, oh my gosh, it made me like emotional to see it, because I'm like, I know it's CG, it's all CG, but it's like some of the best CG I feel I've seen.
Oh, same. I feel the exact same way. Gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous scene.
It's so good. So anyway, they are about to travel to the Undying Lands, and then
there's this really great moment of when they're sort of de-armoring. I don't know what the word is. Taking off the armor, and Galadriel is holding on to the dagger, and she she quite let it go. But they probably don't want Galadriel of all people bringing weapons into the Undying Lands. So she
strictly
does
no weapons policy. In Valinor. That is the same dagger that she got from her brother's corpse. In the prologue, right? So, yeah.
And I love that sort of symbolism of like, you can't take it with you. You can't take it with you.
You can't take it with you.
Yeah. And then we get the chanting, and of course they all know the words, and Galadriel's not singing, and the birds. I thought that was one of the most beautiful sequences. Bear McCreary did an absolutely amazing job on that part.
I agree.
Absolutely amazing.
I agree.
Yeah.
And we see this meteor come in. It's like, no idea what's going on here. But I guess for her, the meteor is kind of a signal to like, hey, something's wrong. Like, you shouldn't go on this trip.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
So she dives down, and and also when the meteor comes in, and we'll talk a little bit about how other people react to the meteor later on, of course. But you do get a shot of the Ents. The Ents, right?
And the little Entings, the little baby Ents just kind of leaning in close to. I love that. And again, we're probably never going to see it again, but there's that CG
cool.
shot.
That's Two Towers, right? Is when we saw Ents in the movies, right? So yeah. And then she dives into the water, and it's very like a fairly protracted sequence of her senior commando elf being like, come on, Galadriel, and she's like, I can't do it, I can't, and then she jumps into the water, and I guess swims for a long time is my
Yeah.
guess.
So just for anyone that was like, there's no way elves could swim that way. Elves are superhuman, right? They are next level. They are better than us in pretty much every way.
Mm-hmm.
But I had the moment when I was watching this in the theater the first time when she jumps in. I'm like, well, where's the boat? She's not going to get rescued right away, and she just starts swimming. I'm like, okay, I guess she's swimming. You go, girl.
Yeah. So she swims. I was watching with my wife. She's like, "How does she know where to swim to?" I was just like, clearly, just in the opposite direction of what the ship was going in.
Yeah.
So
Good for her, though.
So she's at sea, and then she finds a raft of people, and kind of is led on board. And they're humans that are on board.
Yes,
so she like
they
covers
are. They
her
are
ears
humans.
because, as we'll get into later, and I want to talk more in depth about this later. Like elves and humans have a very fraught relationship, and I want to explore that with you a little bit later. But let's just finish off this Galadriel stuff first. There is a worm, something called a worm. And is this a well-known Middle Earth monster, Don Marshall?
No. There are references to sea monsters both in the maps of Middle Earth and at the Council of Elrond. I think in the book, Tolkien explains, or rather, I should say, Gandalf explains that no, you can't just drop the One Ring in the ocean because there are sea monsters and plate tectonics exist, and the lands will move and change, and we're just delaying the inevitable. So we can't drop it in the ocean. So yes, this is not just something that they decided to have. There are lots of big, scary monsters in Middle Earth.
I think what's fascinating about this show is it very much is an exercise in some ways of like offhanded references to things and trying to make an entire show with a compelling story out of it, right? Because this is largely based on the appendices, as we discussed in our preview episode. So it's fascinating that like Gandalf makes an offhanded reference to sea creatures, and now a visual artist spends 100 hours perfecting this worm that we see in this episode.
Yep.
It's basically a streaming version of the butterfly effect, I think.
Pretty much.
So things turn around for Galadriel real quick because this woman's like, no, let her come on board. Give her some of our precious water and rations to kick her off the ship as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Only 2 moments later, be kicked off the ship by that same woman who let her on. When the worm attacks.
Yeah. So she's. I guess they really don't like elves on the ship. Is kind of my takeaway from it. So she kind of jumps off, and then the worm annihilates the raft that she was on, and then this dude Halbrand comes to her aid and lets her climb aboard the ship. The raft, and they have a few interactions. There is a big storm that happens. There's a scene where Halbrand reaches into the water, and I think he's gonna try to grab a fish or something, but he's actually just getting some water to slick back his hair because these are 2 of the best looking people on the show, Don. So
it was the most unnecessary scene, but I know so many people loved it because that had the same energy as Aragorn opening the double doors in the 2 towers. You didn't need to do it that way, but why not just look pretty while you do it, right?
Why not? They talk about the battles they've seen, and she makes the point that she's really pursuing this Sauron guy who's killed so many people that she's known, and how dare you question my intentions, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess I'm curious if you have any other thoughts. I thought this whole sequence is a little bit confusing to me because I'm like, why is he helping? Why is he helping her? Wouldn't he have formed a relationship with all these other people that maybe they all just died, right? Maybe when the worm hit it, they all died, and he's like, well, I'm gonna take on the last person but they don't show them all dying, so we just assume that they died, right?
No, there's very much, I think, the understanding that they get eaten because there's a quick scene, I don't know if you caught it, where Halbrand, this human, basically unties part of one raft and it lets the other part of the raft go that everybody else is on, and that's kind of how he makes his escape, and Galadriel's in the water. But I'll be honest, wasn't crazy about these scenes. It definitely felt like it was giving Galadriel sort of the motivation because Halbrand is a man from the south and he's seen orcs, so Galadriel's like, I've been traveling in the wrong direction this whole time, oh no. So I think eventually
Right.
they will wind up in the South somewhere.
Halbrand's kind of like basically like an exposition machine, pretty much. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah, it kind of
he's like
felt that
a
way.
plot device, as it
Yeah,
were, right?
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, it's like what is his motivation for taking her on board again?
yeah. I have
She
no idea.
yeah. It's because Don, they're the most like some of the most attractive people on the show, so I
Yeah,
think that's
beautiful
why
people have to stick
they
together.
have to stick together. They have to stick together. So, and then there is a mysterious figure on a ship that happens upon the raft.
Oh no.
Who could it be? Who could it be? Unclear.
Sure, sure it is.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. See, this is our first test of the non-spoiler policy, Don, and I appreciate it.
I'm
I
trying.
appreciate it.
All
Don's self-restraint is massive there. Okay. So that is the Galadriel storyline this episode. Overall, I think they do a pretty good job of introducing her as a character. I think that a lot of the characters in the show are well-known archetypes, I would say. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't necessarily mind that because it's
Mm-mm.
like, hey, if you can deliver a good, well-executed, well-known archetype, that's fine. But, Galadriel is like a person who is trying to break out of the constraints that society has set for her,
Right.
and follow her own path in the pursuit of doing what she believes is right. Now, I think in the notes, Don, you made the comment that like a lot of this Galadriel stuff is actually made up. Is that correct? Like,
yeah, so the showrunners did something very interesting that I actually enjoy because I love when we see characters that are given agency. Tolkien's books don't really talk a lot about Galadriel in her time in the Second Age, and she's hanging out in various elven forest capitals and places and kingdoms, giving advice, helping others, and then she goes to Lothlorien, like we see in the Fellowship of the Ring, and that's about it as far as the books go. So I'm very much, I think from a marketing perspective, it makes sense because for those that have maybe only seen the movies, they're like, hey, you want to see this young Galadriel origin story? And so the fact that they're giving her something to do, I think is a good idea from both a marketing perspective, and I quite like the story that is being told about her so far.
yeah, I think that one of the great things about prequels, the thing a prequel can do really well is make the other things that you see later on in the story more meaningful, right? Um, so I'll give two examples that I often go to that I think do a good job of this. I would say Rogue One, a Star Wars story,
Oh,
relatively good prequel,
love
relatively
it.
good prequel because
Love
it's
it.
like, oh wow, like there's a lot of meaning now
In that one line of
in that one
text.
line of text, right?
Yeah.
About like how they got the plans for the Death Star, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that's cool. Another prequel, I would say, Better Call Saul.
Mm.
The character Saul Goodman. Now you have a completely different lens with which to view that character. If you ever watch Breaking Bad again, and so the question is, when you rewatch after we finish watching the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power, when we rewatch Fellowship of the Ring, the movies, is it all going to make sense? Like, oh yes, it makes sense that Galadriel like killed a bunch of orcs, before we saw her as Kate Blanchett in the
Mm-hmm.
first movie, or does it make Fellowship of the Ring and that kind of stuff more interesting? Right?
Mm.
Is it more interesting because we now have the knowledge from the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power? That is the question that's going to animate at least part of the show, in my opinion, and
100%.
how well it does, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's really smart from a marketing perspective as well. I think Morphin, like, because it's like, hey, remember the character you saw from the other thing? It's that one.
Yeah.
And also, I think Morphin Clark is doing a pretty good job in the role.
She's phenomenal. I've had the pleasure of meeting her twice now, and she is just the kindest person in real life. And I'm so glad that her acting talent is being portrayed on screen because I don't think she tries to be Kate Blanchett. She is very much her own person in Galadriel, and I love what she's bringing to the screen.
A lot is demanded of her because, first of all, I think by screen time in these first two episodes, she gets the most. Is kind of my
Yeah.
guess. It might,
Yeah, I think she's
not,
probably got the most focus on these two episodes. I mean, there's a reason we spent almost a half hour talking about her.
The episode opens with her as a character. Like and I think it closes with no, it doesn't. Anyway,
it closes, I think, with her in the water. Oh
is
no,
that?
I think it's Meteor Man. Actually, I think it's Meteor Man.
Yeah. But anyway, but it opens with her. It spends a lot of time with her, and the camera spends a lot of time really close up to her face. Like
it does, doesn't it? Yeah, that was one of my nitpicks. I was like, oh, that's a yeah. It's like, hello,
like really close.
Hello, everybody. How you doing? How you doing?
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that when we get to Khazad-dûm as well. I have a couple of thoughts about the amount of close-ups on the dwarves. There's so many.
Yes.
There's so many.
Okay. Let's talk about the Elrond stuff now as well. Why don't we get into the Elrond stuff? Okay.
Yeah.
Which is going to lead into the Durin stuff.
Yeah.
So Gil-galad says, I've got a mission for you, you know? And when I'm watching this, I'm thinking, oh, they're going to make the Rings of Power. No. Turns out they are going to make the thing that is going to make the Rings of Power. Right?
When I first heard that line, I was like, oh, they're going for a slow burn, because we don't see we do see Celebrimbor introduced, but he doesn't have any lines in the first episode. So this mission that Elrond has kind of been given, I was like, oh, we might not even see the physical rings this season. We might just see the forge.
We might not see the titular Rings of Power this season. I mean, it's possible we might not even see the forge being finished this season.
That is true. That is a good point.
We might seasons off from the rings, from the titular Rings of Power. So anyway, they meet Celebrimbor. There's a scene where Celebrimbor he's the guy who's like making the forge, right? With the schematics and stuff, right? And there's this sword or handle or something like tool, right?
Yes, this is the Hammer of Feyenoor.
What is the Hammer of Feyenoor, Don Marshall?
Right. So, as I was mentioning about 20 minutes ago, giving you all of the backstory of the first stage between Feyenoor and Morgoth and the Silmarils, the Hammer of Feyenoor is the hammer that Feyenoor, one of, if not the most powerful elves ever, used to create what are known as the Silmarils, the sacred jewels. There were 3 of them that the elves revered above all else because they contained within them the light of those 2 trees that we see in the very beginning, Laurelin and Telperion. And there's a couple of very interesting tidbits about how Fëanor may have been inspired by Galadriel's hair, and so that's why Gimli's gift is so important in Fellowship of the Ring. And whether or not Fëanor is a good person is very much entirely up to the reader's sort of standpoint, because he made a lot of mistakes. But Fëanor is the creator of the Silmarils and more or less the catalyst for everything that happens in the first age.
Got it. So that's who the person whose tool is being described by Celebrimbor.
Yeah,
in that scene between him and Elrond. So then Elrond is like, "Hey, I got an idea. I got a friend who can help us out with this job." So then they go to visit Durin, right?
Durin the Fourth
at Khazad-dûm, right?
Khazad-dûm, yes.
Now, before we get to Khazad-dûm, any other things about the Elrond storyline we want to mention? One of the things you mentioned in the notes that I want to make sure we call out is there's a moment with the Elrond storyline where Elrond says, like, Galadriel has passed beyond my sight.
Ah, yes. This was a lovely callback that we got kind of to the Return of the King movie. There's a scene in Return of the King when the Battle of Pelennor Field is over and Gandalf is standing in a tower in Minas Tirith, and he goes, "Frodo has passed beyond my sight." And that confused a lot of people that maybe didn't read the books or didn't understand, but it's not necessarily a metaphorical understanding, but there is now a point in time where Gandalf can't even guess what's going to happen next with him because of the way things have gone down, right? The Aragorn has shown up, the army of the dead, they've won. Gandalf can no longer perceive the actions that might happen. And so in that same way, Elrond has kind of said, Galadriel has passed beyond my sight. So
what triggers someone passing beyond someone's sight? Like just things become so unpredictable, like too many factors become unpredictable, right? Basically?
Yeah, it also can potentially be like a finality. But again, some people read into it as like, oh, well, maybe Gandalf has a sort of sixth sense about it. Maybe Elrond has a sixth sense about it. Tolkien plays pretty fast and loose with his sort of magic systems in a way that like Robert Jordan in The Wheel of Time doesn't, where there's like a hard set rules for this magic. Tolkien is, sometimes they have nature magic, the elves. Sometimes the wizards can create fireballs, and sometimes, they can't do anything because they're trapped on top of a tower. And it kind of, don't think too hard about it is kind of my answer, but it was a very nice callback to sort of say,
or call forward Don Marshall, perhaps.
I guess it would be if Elrond said it first. Yeah.
So they go to Khazad-dûm. Now, Khazad-dûm is actually depicted in the Fellowship of the Ring trilogy, right?
Yes, it is.
It's the place that Gimli's like, you guys got to see Khazad-dûm. This place is amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they go there, and it's like a complete waste, if I recall correctly, right?
Yes, it is.
Which is sad. And what has happened between? I think it's because it's from the original movies. We can explain like some calamity clearly occurred.
Right. So a calamity occurs at some point in Moria, and there are several attempts to, in the Third Age, resettle it. And so the settlement, the most recent one, is actually, if you've watched the Hobbit movie, can we spoil the Hobbit movies as well?
I think that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
The long white-haired dwarf named Balin that we see in the Hobbit movies takes a couple of dwarves with him to try and see, hey, Moria's been abandoned for a very long time. Maybe the orcs are gone. Maybe we can resettle it. And in the books, they do. And in the movies, it's kind of hinted at. But this settlement goes awry because there are still orcs there in the Third Age. And Balin is actually the one in the tomb that we see in the Fellowship of the Ring when they're in that it's called the Chamber of Mizarble. But that's who that is.
Yeah, but it's just a nice touch, I think, that Gimli wasn't full of crap,
No. It was
it actually was. It was beautiful, and that's the thing is like Gimli sets it up in such a big way that they had to really deliver on it in this episode of like, this place is spectacular, and I think they do a pretty good job of it. You can understand what visually, like when someone looks at it, they're like, wow, this is truly a marvel of engineering. Like the freaking mirror that
with the lights,
sun on so they can grow plants is like,
I love that.
Incredible.
I loved that so much. That was such a cool, again, one of those $1 million CGI shots that we may never, I hope we see way more of it, but we may never see it again.
I suspect we'll see a little bit more of Khazad-dûm.
I really hope so. I really like the dwarven culture. And I loved in the promotional stuff leading up to this, JD and Patrick, the showrunners, really leaned in heavy. Like we wanted to pay respect to the dwarven culture because there's a lot there. There's a lot there that we don't get to see in the original trilogy.
Female dwarves to start with, right? Like there's no female dwarves in
Disa.
Disa. But we meet dwarves of all different shapes and sizes and colors and genders in this episode, and it's wonderful. It's nice. It's just nice, and it feels like well thought out. It doesn't feel just like fan servicey, in my opinion. So anyway, okay, so they have a big confrontation at the. Well, I was going to say even before that point, they have this at the front door where like Elrond is trying to negotiate his way into the front door, and he's unable to get in because Durin refuses his request.
Yep.
And so they have this big rock breaking ceremony. He challenges him to the rock breaking. Now, what I thought was hilarious about this was just that Elrond and Celebrimbor have traveled God knows how long. right?
It's not terribly far. So Celebrimbor, by the way, Charles Edwards in that scene sold me as Celebrimbor. I was not as sold on him when I saw the promotional images, but his screen time completely sold me on him. I think he did a great job. I think he owned it. Celebrimbor, his sort of area that he rules over is a place called Eregion, and Eregion is actually just west of the Misty Mountains in the Mines of Moria, so it probably was closer to Khazad-dûm than Rivendell is. So it probably wouldn't have taken them too long.
But it's like a day's hike, Don, okay? You ever hiked 8 hours? Imagine if you hiked 8 hours and you're like, oh, actually you can't see the waterfall that you came to hike.
And that's when Elrond invokes the right of Sigyn Tarag, which here's another fun obscure Lord of the Rings fact. Sigyn Tarag is what's known as Neo-Khuzdul, which we don't know a lot about the Dwarven language, so people have just sort of created their own conlang, their own constructed languages out of it. And so Sigyn Tarag is the Dwarvish word for longbeards. So he is invoking the right of the longbeards.
Cool. So anyway, I just think Celebrimbor, he's like, okay, I came all this way and now I'm just going to turn around. Kind of a bummer for him. All right, Elrond goes, they go on a rock breaking thing. And the idea is that whoever loses the rock breaking contest is banished from the Dwarven lands forever, right? So Elrond loses, he like gives up at the end of the thing, and then Durin is going to escort him out, and they have a very tense confrontation on the lift.
I love that scene. I think that was really, really well written.
I really liked it a lot because I think that the sense is that Elrond hasn't seen Durin in decades, it sounds like, right?
I believe he says 20 years.
Even though, as you said, Don, it's not that far away. It's far enough away that it's like a challenge to get there, okay? And how long do dwarves live? Do dwarves live like human lifespans, basically? Or?
So a little more than human lifespans. If I'm remembering correctly, it's anywhere between like 200 to 300-ish years. However, and this is especially important for Durin, the line of Durin is an important one for the dwarves. The dwarves were created by one of the lesser gods that I mentioned, called the Feyenoor. His name was Aule, and you may actually hear a few exclamations of Aule's beard. Aule is the creator of the dwarves, and they invoke his name, and it's like saying, "Oh, Jesus Christ," to us. That's kind of the equivalent. But when Aule created the dwarves, he created one of the dwarves named Durin. And Durin basically has this line of descendants, and they live, and they're all basically called Durin. There's Durin the Second and Durin the Third, whom we see a little bit later. And this is Durin the Fourth. And they can live, I think one of them lives for like 700 years. I need to look up the ages of all of them. But yeah, they can live a decent time.
That said, still way less than elves, which live thousands of years, basically.
Yeah, right? Elrond is close to, I think, 6,000-ish years, maybe closer to 3,000 or 4,000 years old at this point.
So you really get a sense of, hey, there's a power differential between us. You know, you live potentially 10x longer than I do, and what is a very short period of time for you is actually a massive period of time for me. And I really felt it. Don, you know, watching this scene, especially because of the events of the last few years, the pandemic, and I think many people feel like they've lost a lot of time off of their lives.
100%, yeah.
And the idea of like encountering someone who like might not feel the same way or like is in a different place than you, and like the bitterness and the resentment that can result from that. It all kind of felt very real to me, and that's kind of the best of what I think fantasy can be, is using this extremely unlikely to happen in the real world scenario, which is like an elf arguing with a dwarf to kind of remind you about, in this case, you know, our own mortality and our own relationships with our friends, you know?
Yeah. And seeing Elrond for Durin especially is a reminder of his own mortality, right? I think he said, I think I have the quote here: "You missed my wedding, the birth of my children. 20 years may be the blink of an eye to an elf, but I've lived a life in that time, a life you missed."
Yeah.
And that, Owain Arthur, just the delivery of that line for me just hit me right at the core. Because
Yeah.
because you're right, it does kind of remind you of the pandemic. We've missed a lot of life. We've lost loved ones sometimes, and it just
Yeah.
like that one hit real hard for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Powerful scene.
Mm-hmm.
So Elrond is very gracious, apologizes,
Mm-hmm.
and he's the bigger man in the scenario, even though literally and figuratively, I guess. Um, and he's like, okay, fine, you can come in and you can take a look around, but then like you got to go. And then of course, they meet Durin's wife, and she's like, you got to stay for dinner, and they have a lovely interaction. Talking about like there's a tree that Elrond gave to him that he planted, and it's like, oh, what a lovely idea that like he gave him this tree and it can still grow even in this cave, and that there's a lot of love in this household, So
And
uh,
you can tell.
yeah, it's all just lovely stuff. Lovely stuff. Any things you want to call out from this entire sequence, Don?
100%. One, I need to give a shout out to Sophia Nomvita, who does an amazing job as Disa. I think just the way that she presents herself in contrast to Doran, I love their dynamic. I love their relationship. I want those two to have more screen time and potentially several spin-offs, but that's neither here nor there. um, couple of things I just wanted to point out, little fun, obscure details. One of Doran's kids is named Gamli, Gamli, kind of close to Gimli, but I quite like it. Disa is introducing the idea of something called resonating, which is, I don't think
Oh
something
yeah,
Tolkien ever talked about, but
such a cool
singing.
idea, like echolocating basically
Yeah.
for dwarves, right?
I think that is going to be when we see it, right? Because that's just the teaser. It's like, oh, you want to see dwarven chorus? We got you. I can't wait to see that scene. I'm so excited.
Well, it's also like now I understand why the dwarves sang so often in the Hobbit prequels. It's
Yeah.
because the sound and the music is actually serves a purpose for their jobs and such.
Yeah. It's a nice little nod to a lot of the dwarven culture. I did also really like the idea that we see Elrond sort of shed his politician persona, right? When he's talking to Gil-galad, when he's talking to Celebrimbor, when he's trying to present himself as this stately man of the people, man of peace, pacifist, politician. But at the dinner scene, we see he's sort of dropping that when he gives the apology. It's like, congratulations, I'm so happy you got married. I'm sorry that I missed it. Let me make it up to you. But he kind of turns it back on a little bit by playing on Disa's emotions with Elrond. I thought that was a really well written scene.
So the whole idea is that Elrond is trying to get Durin to come help make this forge for the Rings of Power, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think, have they said the rings yet? I don't think they've mentioned rings yet.
No, I
think we can assume that it's Rings of Power. Is that fairly safe assumption?
I don't want to spoil it, but I already nodded.
Good.
So
that's good. That was a test done. That was a test. but
5 out of
I
10.
mean, the title of the show is The Rings of Power, and they're trying to create some amazing jewelry. I'm guessing it's for the Rings of Power. So will Durin help or not? I think he's debating it with his father in the final scene of the second episode, right?
Yes. This is Durin in their last portion. We see Durin the Third having a conversation with Durin the Fourth, and I've referred to it as the Pulp Fiction scene because they lift up the briefcase. There's a big shiny light coming out of it, and
okay, so you have a guess for what it is based off of your knowledge.
I do.
So I'm gonna let Don guess, but if you're listening or watching this right now, you don't want to know what it is because Don's probably right. Skip forward by 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and but Don, what do you think is in that case that's at the end of episode 2 that Durin the Third and Fourth are talking about?
I think that this is Mithril, and I think we are going to see the discovery of Mithril by using the resonance, and I think we could also potentially see with this Mithril the creation of something called Ithildin or Star Moon, which is what they use to make the doors in Moria that we see in Fellowship of the Ring.
All right. So it's the doors in Fellowship of the Ring. Also, what else is Mithril used for in Fellowship of the Ring?
Mithril is used for
Isn't it on his armor as well?
Yes, Frodo has a Mithril shirt.
Mm. All
That
right.
protects him from it's pretty much indestructible.
That is the Galadriel, Elrond, and Durin storylines for the first 2 episodes of The Rings of Power. I thought these were the strongest plot lines, I have to say. You know, we're going to talk about the other stuff that happens, but like this was the strongest material in the first 2 episodes, and especially the Elrond Durin stuff. You really get a sense of like those characters, their families, their dynamics, in a way that I don't even think you get with Galadriel, really, because Galadriel is kind of a fairly, again, archetypical character who's like, I gotta fight the evil, you know. But like with Elrond and Durin, you get a sense of like, hey, these characters have a history and they've been through some things, and you know, and I like that a little bit more. The Elrond Galadriel stuff was also pretty good.
And these three interconnect.
I wish there was more Galadriel kind of talking with normal people, basically, is kind of what I'm saying, right? Like having normal interactions with people. So. All right, Don Marshall, before we get to the other plot lines in this first 2 episodes of The Rings of Power, let's talk a little bit about where people can find more of your work on the internet. You're listening to this. For many thousands of people, this will be the first time they've heard Don Marshall talk at length about anything. And they're loving it. They're like, this is amazing. I want to hear more of this. Where can people find more of your work, Don?
I am known as Don Marshall 72 across every social media platform you can find me on. I'm on TikTok mostly, host about 580,000 followers there. I'm also on Instagram. I'm on YouTube where I post the Bird Overlord story where a couple of my friends and I are playing a sort of Dungeons and Dragons-esque TTRPG style game where we're doing that. So if you have any interest, go check out YouTube. I'm on Twitter and just pretty much doing the whole social media content creator thing. But yeah, Don Marshall 72 everywhere.
And if you're enjoying this conversation and want to get access to more like it, you can listen to the free version of this podcast at podcast.decodingtv.com. Support this show at decodingtv.com. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/decodingtv. And also, we'll be on TikTok at tiktok.com/@decodingtv as well. So find us across all the different locations at Decoding TV. All right, Don. A couple of other plot lines in this episode.
Let's do it.
All right. There is the Harfoots. Let's talk about the Harfoots real quick. Okay. What are Harfoots, Don Marshall?
All right. So
are they hobbits? Are they not hobbits? Like, what's the deal with
Here's
Harfoots?
The thing. We're going to get a little bit meta here, right? We're going to sort of peer back behind the curtain of this story to discuss book rights and what you can name certain things, but I'll make it quick. The Harfoots are, you can think of them like the Hobbits' ancestors or the proto-Hobbits. And the reason that they are not Hobbits specifically is because Hobbits in Tolkien's lore did not come around until the Third Age. There's no written history of them sort of in their wanderings of the many parts of Middle-earth. We get 3 families of Hobbits that sort of begin their journey, and that is the Stores, the Fallowhides, and the Harfoots. And those 3 families lived in a place not too far from like the Lothlorien, Fangorn-ish area called the Vales of the Anduin. And they journeyed because of various battles and famines and diseases and all. They journeyed to the other side of the Misty Mountains, and then eventually, might be a spoiler, but the Shire exists, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, got it.
And so think of these as like the Hobbit Light, the Hobbit's ancestors, the Hobbit adjacents that are leading towards the Hobbits.
And why do we think they couldn't just be called Hobbits in this franchise?
That I think is a rights issue. I think there are certain.
But I thought Amazon had the rights to The Hobbit, though, right?
I believe I could be wrong about this, but if I'm remembering correctly, they only got the rights to The Hobbit after they had already written and potentially filmed a lot of their stuff.
They couldn't ADR in the word Hobbit every time someone said Harfoot?
They certainly could try. I don't know how people would feel about that.
Well, anyway, they're basically hobbits, but we'll call them Harfoots just to humor the show.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay. So we meet the Harfoots, and there is a scene where they're kind of out in the fields, and they have these like massive moose antler like things on their back,
So
right?
these are just two normal sized human hunters that visually are very cool, but even I don't know why they have the sort of megafauna antlers on their back. I love
Yes.
the visual; it was very cool, but I'm like, um, what? And it was just a nice little
Yeah,
aside.
yeah. Sorry. So those were not the Harfoots. Those are
No,
humans that
no.
then the Harfoots saw them, though, I believe, right?
Yes,
Is that right? Yeah. And
yes.
then
They
they have
hide
the
from the big people.
yeah, yeah. They have an interaction, and we kind of meet like all the different Harfoots like real quickly. But the main ones are going to be Nori and
Yes.
her friend Poppy. Is that right?
Yes. So Nori, there's another character in the Lord of the Rings that is also named Nori. Some people got confused. I believe her name is Eleonora or Eleanor. I don't remember which
Mm-hmm.
one. But yes, Eleanor, Nori, and then Poppy are sort of the two friends that are definitely giving me some Merry and Pippin vibes as well.
Yes, yes. Or perhaps Frodo and Samwise vibes.
A little bit. Poppy seems a bit more mischievous, or excuse me, Nori seems a bit more mischievous. So that's where I'm kind of getting like it wouldn't
Right.
surprise me if Nori grabbed a firework and launched it in a tent, just like Merry and Pippin did.
Yeah, I guess because Frodo was like, I don't want to do this adventure necessarily, right? And Nori is like, I want to get out, I want to see the world.
Yeah,
I want to
yeah,
get to the big city, like, and yeah.
yeah.
So eventually Nori discovers this meteor man that's descended from the sky. But before we
Yeah.
get to that, I guess is there any other details or things you want to call out about? I will say, like, the detail on the Harfoot society is really impressive. Just like the people hiding in trees, the tools that they're using, the books
Mhm.
that they're using, like the way the little town is production design, like it's all very impressive.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm curious if there's anything else you want to call out.
Uh, Calling out specifically, I will say that the Harfoots, I think I need to take my your advice to me. No thoughts, just vibes. The Harfoots to me are no thoughts, just vibes. Just enjoy them. Worry about the stranger later. But every time I heard the music, the penny whistle, I was reminded of the Shire, or every video game I've ever played that has a starting village tutorial. It brought back and evoked such emotion of like, oh, these quaint little cute creatures. This is so great. I love the scenery. I love the tools. I thought Lenny Henry did an amazing job as Sadok, this like old wizened gray hobbit. Harfoot. That is just like even I'm doing it.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
boy.
nice.
But yeah, it definitely feels it almost, and I don't know how true this is going to be, but because of the rights and various things, I always kind of assumed, maybe incorrectly, that the Harfoots are going to be kind of like that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern style in Hamlet, where like they're not going to add much to the plot. They're just going to
Mm.
have this little aside that we can go to and sort of explain a little bit and provide some context. And maybe Meteor Man will mess up my theory on that.
I think your theory is well true and dead, even at this point, Don. Like, I would be. They are clearly, in my opinion, positioning Nori as like a major character this season. I
Yeah.
would argue, right?
Yeah. No,
Uh,
it feels that way too.
who I think is played wonderfully by Markella Kavanaugh. Like, she gets a lot of emotional moments during this episode where
Mhm.
you really, again, it's very Galadriel esque, where like you feel like this longing of wanting something beyond what life has given you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think she does a great job conveying that, and taking care of this meteor man becomes part of that. But interesting to note kind of what you thought the Harfoot plotline would be, which is kind of a throwaway, where it's like, I think, I haven't seen the whole show yet, Don, but like there, at least at this moment, seems to be a distinct possibility Nori is going to be like one of the pillars of the show. I don't know.
We
But
shall see.
I guess I'm just describing how much of an impression that character made on me, because I thought she made a lot with fairly little in terms of plot that happens this episode.
Mhm. Yeah. Two other things I do want to quickly call out before we head south to the Southlands. There were two really amazing moments that were great details. Nori does a really cool gesture when she is telling this meteor man, the stranger as he's known, does this cool gesture when she says, "I'm Nori." And it reminded me, because I've had some experience in the American Sign Language community of name signs, where she does a sign. I believe she puts her hand to the top of her head and pushes it out in a sort of letter almost. I thought that was a really cool touch. I don't know if that was intentionally like having some ASL representation, but I really liked that. That was a really cool just like moment for me.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, and do you want to get to sort of like discussion heavy on who the stranger is, or do we just want to sort of let that one ride?
I think we have to acknowledge that there has been tons of speculation on who the stranger is on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Don probably knows who it is.
I actually don't.
Well, you have a very good guess as to who it is, right?
I have 3 guesses, and I am not sure about any of them. And that is kind of the most exciting part for me, is that I don't know where this character's going.
All right. So Don is going to guess right now on the show, but like if you don't want to know what the guess is, skip forward a little bit. But Don, give us your number one guess, who I think is like what everyone is saying it is.
Sure.
Who is the stranger in this show?
I think the stranger is either one of the wizards, or I think he is a Balrog. Now hear me out. Me out.
I thought you were going to say Gandalf.
I know. I was originally going to say Gandalf.
Yeah, that was in the notes.
It was in the notes. And then
you're calling it audible.
I am, but this is something that a friend of mine explained to me not like 12 hours ago. So I want to do a brief tidbit of information that is sort of a bit of obscure facts that will sort of maybe won't let people know who he is, but is a nice little language obscure fact. So the stranger has something that he yells in this one scene with Nori, and he says,
after he wakes up and he's kind of like he like needs something, right?
Yes. So he's carving these things on the ground, and he says 2 words, and I watched it with subtitles the second time. He says, "Mana Ure." M-A-N-A, mana, and Ure, U-R-E. Now, when you look up the Elvish, mana is a sort of question word meaning who or what, and Ure can mean heat. And there are a couple of theories out there, because as folks that have seen the Fellowship of the Ring movie, Gandalf says, "I am a servant of the secret fire." And so there is this idea of like what fire, or who is the fire? What is the fire? And so that is kind of where I got my Gandalf idea. A friend of mine explained.
Well, we should also point out, by the way, there's that moment when he kind of whispers to the fireflies or whatever, right? And that mirrors a scene that happens in the Fellowship trilogy, right?
When he talks to the moth and whisks the moth away. Yes,
exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Beautiful scene, by the way. The fireflies was kind of heartbreaking. I think Megan did a great job with Poppy in that scene when all of the... Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself and distracted.
Okay, but you originally thought it was Gandalf, which is a very reasonable guess. And a lot of people are guessing it's Gandalf online, right?
I think also, though, because Balrogs are, in essence, shapeshifters, and they are what's known as a Maya. They're called Maiar. They are basically like... I mentioned before the Ainur, the children of thought that the god in Tolkien's universe made ages and ages ago at the beginning of time. There is sort of like a subset of Ainur who are known as Maiar, and they're not as powerful. Gandalf is one, Sauron is one. These aren't spoilers; these are just little tidbits of power levels. But they're also shapeshifters. There are many Maya in the Second Age that transform to take different forms to help out with various tasks that need to be sort of completed. And I won't go too deep into that, but the idea that perhaps this stranger will change shape eventually is certainly on my mind. And the fact that he mentions...
Now, the Balrog is the massive creature that is vanquished in, I think, the first Lord of the Rings movie. Is that right?
Yes. The Balrogs were originally, way back in the First Age. I was actually kind of hoping we would see one in the prologue, because they're used in battle in the First Age when Morgoth is fighting against the armies of the elves. And when Morgoth is defeated at the end of the First Age, the Balrogs run. right? They flee to the deepest parts of the earth. So,
Gotcha.
The Balrog theory for me doesn't really hold up as much, but when he mentioned heat and the fact that it's a shapeshifter, my friend was like kind of egging me on a little bit. So
You really think it's the Balrog and not Gandalf, Don?
no, I want it.
Come on, man.
A part of me is thinking that it's like it's so clearly one of the wizards and probably Gandalf that like I'm just waiting for
I could see
like
it being another wizard. That'd be cool. It's like another non-Gandalf wizard. You know,
if it's one of the blue wizards, Alatar or Palando, that we don't really see but we know of in the books, could be one of them. I don't know.
I think you're getting too far into it, Don.
Yeah,
I think you're getting. I think
no
it's probably. Well, I'm just saying. You know, you had a great guess, Gandalf, and now you're like, but what if it's not? What if it's this shape-shifting Balrog instead? Now, if you're right, then it's like, wow,
I'm a genius.
One of the greatest calls of all, like one of the greatest predictions of all time. But
you heard it here.
Feels unlikely. It feels, I don't know. Based on the show so far that we've been presented with, it doesn't feel like they would pull a twist like that. Like, oh, this person that Nori has been helping all the time is actually bad. You know, like I don't. It doesn't feel like the show would do that. You know,
that's why I'm leaning more towards the wizard thing. I just kind of like the idea of like maybe they are trying to pull a fast one on us. But but yeah, that's the Harfoots have. I'll quote my good friend Tori. The Harfoots have my whole heart, and that is, I think, going to be true. If anything happens to Nori or Poppy, I will be very upset.
Yes. But also, it's probably Gandalf or a wizard.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see. Yeah. I don't know. You tell me, Don. Okay. We should also point out that Nori feels bad because she's hanging out with a stranger when her dad's foot gets injured.
Oh, God,
and apparently there's a big migration coming up, which I didn't even know about. It's like there's a migration happening. It's like, is he going to be able to migrate? Who knows? Don't know. But either way, things with the stranger are getting more complicated by the day. So, so that is Harfoot. Nori, the Harfoots, Nori, Poppy, and the Stranger. Final plotline: Bronwyn, who is human.
Yes.
Arondir, who is an elf. Theo, who is Bronwyn's child.
Yes.
Right? We are in the Southlands. We meet these characters that I just outlined. There is tension between the elves and the humans, and I had this question of like, are the elves like an occupying force, basically trying to keep away the evil Sauron, aka the terrorists? Like, what is the relationship between humans and elves? Because there's clearly a lot of resentment.
Yeah, there is a lot of resentment, and this is again where I think that the prologue could have maybe done a little bit of a better job explaining. Could have gone into a little bit more detail. We are in the Southlands, and the Southlands are where the humans that sided with Morgoth in the First Age are. And to humans, that was generations ago, right? We see that one kid yelling about it to Arondir when he walks into that pub, or bar, I guess I should say, tavern. But to elves, what's 5 or 6 generations of humans, right? They're just
right. It's nothing,
Yeah.
So they're basically still evil as far as elves are concerned. Basically,
not necessarily still evil, but like,
well, the elf gives a speech of like, just remember, these are like terrible people. Remember Arondir, they're awful.
Yeah, but I think that elf gave that speech to sort of remind the audience that like, not all humans are bad, and after a while, maybe the evil will sort itself out. And there is perhaps another evil that is coming. I do also I found it really interesting in that scene where the humans were interacting with Arondir, that they chose to put Ishmael Cruz Cordova, the first black elf in Middle Earth, in a situation where he is disliked because of who he is. I thought that was a very interesting choice to sort of put him there
He's
first.
The aggressor, I guess. This situation. Yeah.
It was a very sort of complex choice. I understand introducing it to sort of like immediately identify the tension of the scene and the dynamic between the elves and the humans. Yeah, I'm still sort of mulling that one over. That one didn't quite sit as well with me, but I'm gonna wait and see how it goes. But we have this sort of tender romance to focus on.
You're saying it doesn't sit right with you, probably because like it creates like an unfortunate parallel with like our real society
Yeah.
that it doesn't like it doesn't um, feel fully thought out or explored yet. Certainly in this episode, right? Because
Mhm.
um, I will say, watching the show, it feels pretty race blind in terms of the casting in some
Yeah.
ways, right?
Yeah,
And
I
so
agree.
there's this idea of race blind casting where like you know you cast people of all different races and all the different kind of roles and character types, and there are many benefits to that approach. Um, but it also gets complicated if you can't acknowledge real world racial realities that we live in, you know, in our society.
Yeah.
And is that kind of the sort of
Yeah,
tension
yeah,
you're
that was that
acknowledging? Yeah,
was that was
yeah,
the thing I was kind of feeling, and
yeah.
thank you for putting it way more eloquently than I did. But yeah, that was kind of
No
where I was
worries.
at.
Yeah, but and it's like, I agree. We'll see if the show has anything to say about race. I doubt it. I
Yeah,
doubt it.
no,
Or if it does have anything to say about race, it will do it using like, you know, elves versus humans as a thing.
yeah,
But
that's
again, the presence um of black elves may complicate any kind of clean racial metaphor that it's attempting. Right?
yeah, yeah. But
Unclear.
I definitely don't think, because I heard a lot a lot of this in the sort of in my comment section from very angry people. It's like they're
Yes.
just trying to push their own political agenda. I did not get that at all
Right.
in any of
If
this.
anything, maybe they didn't push the political agenda enough. You know, it's
Yeah.
like,
you it was right there. It was right
yeah,
there. You could have done it a lot more heavy-handed, but no, I think the
yeah.
way they handled it was the right approach, at least.
It's been a light touch for now, and
Yeah.
I guess we should call out that there has been controversies. I don't even think is the right word. A
No.
lot of really angry people
Yeah.
with not a very particularly good reason to be angry about it, complaining that there's black people in Middle Earth. And I think I believe you've made some TikToks about this in the past, Don, and I don't think we need to like relitigate the entire thing.
No. No. No.
But suffice to say that you know, Tolkien didn't do much to specify race, like skin characteristics of the characters.
Right.
There was a little bit, but not that much. And so the depiction of different races in the show or different species in the show as different races feels very, you know, not compatible. Or it feels very compatible with Tolkien's
Yeah,
vision
it's
of
it's
what
a
Middle
non
Earth
it's a
is. Yeah,
non-factor for me.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
non-factor for me, 100%.
Agreed.
Um,
We're on the same page.
and
So
I do kind of like the idea that we are having this sort of like not necessarily romance, because I don't think they've even kissed yet, but between Bronwyn and Arendir, and this kind of like wonderful moment of tenderness by the well, when we get to see this sort of like inclusivity of, right, here's this woman and that's a human, and here's this elf, and we know about a human and elf that fell in love. I wonder if we're going to get those same sort of vibes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, there's also a reference to two other instances in which a human and elf has fallen in love.
Hmm.
There is a Polygon story about this morning about humans and elf relationships and how like Arendir's buddy was probably mischaracterizing how well those relationships ended up, which were not necessarily in catastrophe, right?
Yeah,
So
so the references are the first one is Baron and Luthien, who I actually mentioned before when we were talking about Galadriel, because when she's in the grove, we see that dog in front of the elf statue. That dog, Huan, helps Baron and Luthien on one of their quests in the First Age. And then the other one is I'm completely blanking on it right now. Tuor and Idril, and they are Tuor is the human, Idril is an elf princess. They are again another First Age couple that are, you know, on a quest. There's a city called Gondolin. There's a lot of First Age backstory, but for the most part, both of those stories ended relatively happy, but it was after quite a lot of hardship.
mm,
So I think it was, I read it as this elf kind of saying, "Hey, look, buddy, you're my friend. You know how bad it was for the other two, right?
yeah,
The stereotyping they had to deal with, the anger between the human friends of theirs and the elf friends of theirs. Like it wasn't good, but in the end, as so much of Tolkien's world focuses on, is that love and friendship and companionship can conquer and win out in the end."
yeah. I will say, despite that, I think this is the relationship that feels the least interesting to me on the show. Like, it's just these are two good-looking folks. They're hanging out, and it's like that's mostly it. You know, we get a sense of them referring to all the romance that they have had, which hasn't even been that much. He's like, you know, I've already said it with everything but words, and it's like, okay, I guess it's just been a bunch of furtive glances for the last however many years.
Felt slightly more like Arondir is definitely like that nervous teenager that doesn't have the courage to ask his crush to the prom.
Exactly. So you know, I'm not like, oh, I'm really invested in like how the romance turns out yet. We'll see. They're probably going to go through a bunch of trials, and that'll be interesting. But they go to Hordern, right? Because there is a cow that this guy brings, and he's like, "Hey, something's wrong with my cow." We should point out that Bronwyn is like a medicinal
healer. Yeah,
healer.
she's like a healer woman, and this cursed chocolate milk comes out of this cow, and it's just become...
it's incredible because you look at this cow, you know, like you as a viewer look at this cow, you see him grab the udder of the cow, and it's like all in one shot. It's not like I don't think it's a close up. I don't recall. Maybe it's a close up, but he it looks like it's whatever it is. It looks like it's part of the living cow.
Yeah,
and he squeezes it, and this black ooze comes out, and it's like, wow, that's really. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before. Like black ooze coming out of a cow. What an unsettling visual, you know.
It was so unsettling for me. Like, I'm not a horror movie fan by any means. And that for me, because I wasn't expecting, I was like, oh, maybe there's a sore on its side, or it has some sort of scars from before. But no, it's just straight up like
upsetting.
Ick. Yeah. Upsetting, it gave me shivers.
Yeah. So they go to Hordorn, and they find it in ashes, and there's like a big tunnel underneath like one of the buildings, I guess.
A secret tunnel, if you will.
Secret tunnel, but that clearly has been dug by a creature with intelligence. And Arondir's like, well, I'm going to go down there and figure out what's down there. And it's orcs. It's orcs, right? Orcs are down there. Orcs are crawling everywhere. Bronwyn goes back home. They encounter an orc at her house. Can
we talk about that scene real quick? Do we have?
Yeah, I'm going to say I thought the scene when Bronwyn and her child encounter an orc was weird because she goes into her... The way it's staged is very odd. And we should say J.A. Bayona directed these two episodes. Yeah. Super talented director. He's made The Orphanage and also Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. This guy knows how to do horror movie sequences. And I found the staging of this one to be really bizarre because she goes in, she like finds her son there. He's like, run, and it's like, okay, I guess the orc is taking a break or whatever, and then she like runs away without her child. Like that just didn't make any sense to me that she wouldn't take him with him. And then they have a big fight, and the fight was cool. That fight was awesome, right?
The fight was great.
They're just trying to like stab him in different ways until he's finally dead. But anyway, what were your thoughts on the scene, Don?
So that part I agree with you on. It didn't quite make sense to me in that, you know, mother leaving her child or going to go get help and then immediately just trying to hide. Probably could have been staged a little bit better. That being said, I saw this in IMAX for the first time. So the second time I watched it, it looked so much better. I loved the idea of like the like Chekhov's gun, right? Or there's a bomb under the table or something. This is Chekhov's orc to me, right? You know there's an orc in the house. It's just a matter of time before chaos ensues. And I didn't like seeing it on the big screen because it was a little too shaky. But when you sort of zoom out and you're able to look at all of it, I loved how this was staged, and I loved how they finally made one orc absolutely terrifying. Because when you watch the trilogy movies, right, you are looking at this going, oh my gosh, Legolas, 33, 34, 35. They're just mowing them down. Gimli and Legolas literally have a contest to see how many they can kill. They don't feel like they're in danger or anything yet. But then there's just this one orc, and it's a mom and her kid. And suddenly orcs feel almost, it gave me like, is it 28 days? Then 28 days later that has the fast running zombies.
Yes, that's correct.
It felt very much, I got that same vibe of like, I'm going to be feral. I'm going to pounce on you, and I'm going to do everything I can to mess you up because it's fight or flight right now, and we're fighting. Yeah. So I really liked how they...
Yeah,
did not
that
fix
part
it.
was great. And when like they basically try multiple things to destroy the orc and it doesn't work, right? They try like stabbing him, and the kid tries to like use a noose on him, and then like it doesn't,
Doesn't
and then
work.
it breaks, and it's like yeah, it's a really cool sort of series of things. So when they finally have the confrontation with the orc, it's great. Everything leading up to the confrontation felt a little manufactured to me.
A little bit, a little
Um,
bit.
you know why? What he's right there. Come on, get out of the hole. Let's run away. You know,
Yeah, let's both run away.
let's
Very
run
easy.
away.
There's probably a very easy fix for that. And like, if you heard a foot, maybe I need to rewatch it. Maybe I just missed something, but like maybe she hears the orc upstairs, or if there's some.
Right. I will say, having just watched it, I was like, it's weird. Anyway, but yes, the fight with the orc is great, and I agree with
Yes.
you. It does make the orc scary, and then when she does cut the orc's head off, it's very satisfying. It's like
My whole theater cheered when that happened. That was
awesome.
a great moment.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, okay. So then they're like, hey, we got to go because there's orcs here. We leave at dawn. I was watching this with some friends. They were like, why not leave right away? But whatever. We're going to put that aside for now. They're leaving. The kid,
Theo, played by Tyro Muhaffadine.
Yeah, has a extremely evil looking sword, Don. What's the deal with this sword? Do we know at this point? I don't think so, right?
We don't know what the sword is. And again, I have my guesses just based on my knowledge.
It looks like Sauron equipment based on
the mark of Sauron is on the blade.
Yes.
That Theo holds. And that leads me to believe that it may be some kind of I have a lot of theories, but I think we may be seeing one of the Morgul blades. Aragorn mentions this after Frodo is stabbed by the Ringwraith. He's been stabbed by a Morgul blade, and in that same way that the Morgul blade part disappears off of the hilt in the movie, it is sort of, to me, sort of remade in this sequence, and gains a little bit more of that blade.
I think what this whole situation points to is the fact that public education in Middle Earth is in dire need of reform, because it's like you're gonna carry this evil looking blade. You're living in a world of magical powers, kid. Don't carry the evil blade with you. There is this amazing shot in the episode when she's like, "Hey, are you ready to go?" He opens the door. "Are you ready to go?" And you see in the background all these people like carrying all their belongings, and
it's a great shot.
It's like amazing. And you see the shot for like 3 seconds, and it's like, wow, that's like one of the most beautiful shots I've ever seen. You know, that happens throughout the episode. But anyway, the kid is being dumb because he's a kid, and bringing evil blade with him is going to cause complications. But
yeah,
but he's a kid, so what are you going to do?
Yeah.
All right. That is a very fast. Despite the fact that we've been talking for almost 2 hours, I feel like we sped through a lot of the details. Is there anything else you want to mention, Don, about the first 2 episodes of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, on Prime Video?
I have a crazy theory that I can tell you off show, or we can sort of get into it real quick.
Maybe let's save it for a bonus episode.
Okay, we'll save it for bonus episode, because I have a super crazy theory that involves several characters and sort of how they are interlinked. But I think that this was a great start. I don't want to speak for the rest of the series, because obviously
you have not seen any other episodes.
I have not. No, I have not seen any other episodes. But I think the way they started, for me at least, they captured the spirit of what it means to be back in Middle Earth. I liked a lot of the characters. I don't know if I loved all of them. There were a few points that sort of missed the mark for me. Some of the choices were not what I would have done. But again, I'm nitpicking at this point. But overall, I think this was a really well done show.
Yeah.
So far.
I agree. Even if you don't like the story, which I think at this point we don't really know enough about it to know whether we're going to like it, right? Like,
right.
I think we'll have a pretty clear idea when we get to the end of episode 8. We're going to know, like, oh, that was very satisfying, or oh wow, like it feels like they're still doing setup. You know, like I think we'll have a pretty clear idea. But even if you don't like the story, this is one of the most interesting shows ever made because there's just so many interesting elements to it. It's the most expensive first season of a TV show ever made. It's something that is obviously going to help dictate Amazon's streaming future. It's a recreation of this universe that has become so popular because of Peter Jackson's films, and so you kind of get to like compare and contrast.
Mm-hmm.
Looks amazing. It's an exercise in prequel storytelling to see like how well can you tell an interesting story and answer those questions I referred to earlier in the episode. Right? Does it make what comes later more interesting? Does it make sense when you fit it when you like put it next to what comes later, and so on. So I like the first two episodes. I think very open question as to how the rest of the show is going to go and which storylines it's going to focus on. Like if the whole rest of the show ends up being very Arendir heavy, you know, Arendir and Bronwyn and Theo heavy, I'm going to be like, I'm not loving this so much, just because it's just from what we saw in this episode, not the most interesting material.
Yeah, and I'm giving it a chance to sort of pick up because I don't want to judge it based on just the stuff that I wasn't thrilled about. But no, I think if by the end of, like you said, if by the end of 8 episodes, we've got a pretty firm foundation, I'll be pretty happy if they continue with it.
I think the Galadriel stuff is solid. I think the Elrond stuff is solid. The Durin stuff is solid. Like, I'm really looking forward to spending more time with those characters. And I really like the Nori character. And I'm curious where the Nori character, like, what is the Nori character's journey going to be this season? Because she wants to, she wants to go on an adventure. Like, Frodo didn't really want to go on an adventure. I think Bilbo was like kind of psyched about it, right? I don't think he was actively seeking it out necessarily, but he was kind of psyched. Nori like wants adventure. So the question is she going to get it, and how? And is it going to cost her? And so a lot of potential with that character. And I'm very curious, not that Don sees it, but a lot of potential with the Nori character that I'm curious how they're going to play that out. So,
yeah.
Well, we hope you have enjoyed listening/watching this episode of Decoding TV. And we'll be back next week with another recap of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, to discuss episode 3 next week. In the meantime, he is Don Marshall. I am David Chen. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you later.
Bye.